Hello? Hi, everyone. Hello? Hi, guys. I think we're going to get started with the video now. So feel free, grab some food, grab some drink, and grab a seat or stand if you'd rather, but we'll get started. Thank you.
It's great to see some of you. I know a lot of you have come from considerable distance, and really appreciate and thank that you are here today for the celebration of life for my dad. Also like to thank my sister. Without her, this whole event would not have been able to take place, and so my hat's off to you. Yeah, it'll be a tough one to get through, but just bear with me. Norm, Dad. When I first got my license to drive, Miles, you actually took me to the DMV so I could pass that thing only took me 2 tries. So I get my license, and that weekend, I asked to use the car. Yeah, sure, no problem. So I went off to a party, I think it was in Williston. The evening's wrapping up. People are asking for rides home. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll give you a ride home. So I'm going from Williston to Heinsberg, back to Williston, into Shelburne, back into Charlotte, back into Williston. I'm driving all over the place. So I roll in at about 2 a.m. Pull in, the lights are off in the house. I'm like, all right, this is good. Tiptoeing up to my room. Right as I get to my room, the light flicks on. He goes, hey, let's make it a little earlier next time, shall we? Duly noted. Never disrespected that again. So another time, Dad went off to Hoosac for one of his events down there, but it was only for a single night. Well, I get the bright idea, I'm going to have a little party while he's gone. So the end of the evening, there's empties everywhere. I'm like, oh, Christ, he's coming back the next morning. What the hell am I going to do with all these empties? So I rinse them all out. I throw them in this enormous goalie hockey bag that I have and stuffed them under my bed. I'm like, I'll deal with it later. A couple weeks go by, and I go off to my Outward Bound, which I'm gone for 3 weeks. He picks me up after the 3 weeks that I'm gone, and he goes, hey, I cleaned your room while you were gone. I'm like, oh, yeah? He goes, next time, put those empties in the cellar so we can get the 5-cent return. He loved his history, didn't he? Loved talking about it. Loved regaling everybody with his history knowledge and the dates and the facts. My buddies would come over from high school. We'd be standing around the kitchen. And inevitably, we'd be talking, and inevitably one of my buddies would be like, hey, Mr. Bohn, what do you think of whatever the current event was at the time? And I would be like, oh, God. He would pull out his ashtray and his pack of smokes and start from about the end of World War II and bring you all the way up to the current event. You had at least an hour if you were going to ask him that. But it was so interesting and fascinating. And the guys just loved it. They absolutely loved it. Yeah, Dad. So I'm off to college, and we all know what a planner Norm is. When he had a trip or something, he would check, double check, triple check what was going on, the plans. So I'm off at college, and Miles and Dad are planning a senior trip to Europe? Junior trip to Europe. I think it was a senior trip over to Europe. So I get back from college, and we go over to the Hellers for dinner. And Miles turns to me at one point and says, Christopher, planning this trip with your father, you'd think we were planning the Normandy invasion. Yeah. So I come back from college. Actually, I'm in college, going to spring break, driving from Orono down to Key West. We have to stop by Vermont to pick up some things, because who the hell has their bathing suit and shorts in Maine in February? So we pull in, we stay the night. The next morning, I'm all excited. Dad, want me to send you a postcard? He goes, no news is good news. He loved his family, though. Absolutely loved his family. He loved being around his family. He loved going to Maplewood for Thanksgivings. He loved coming up to Maine and going to our Sea Dogs games up there. He loved it when we all came up to visit. He really enjoyed being with all of us. And he also loved the stories that went along with family. And he loved this one story so much that he's probably told it a couple times, and a couple of you may have heard it before. So we're out in Colorado. We have three kids at the time. They're little. They're all car seat age. And you got to remember, when we go camping, we kind of go big. We have the pop-up, we have all kinds of gear, all kinds of stuff. So the morning of teardown is a bit chaotic. There's lots of stuff to put away, and the kids are not terribly supervised. So we finally get on the road. Jessica, you were at that camping trip. So we get cruising down the road, and Nathan starts rocking back and forth in his car seat. And Kim goes, Nathan, what's the matter? Nathan goes, I don't feel well. She goes, well, what do you feel like? He goes, I feel like shit. 5 seconds later, he projectile vomits all over the car. I had never heard my dad belly laugh so hard for so long. Ugh, that was just fantastic. My dad was always there for me, for us. He was always there to drag me all over God's creation for hockey, get me that hockey stick when I needed it, sharpen those skates, find the resources to send me off to Outward Bound, send me to hockey camp, colleges, and I will forever be grateful for that. I know you will all have your memories of my dad. I love hearing them, the memories that you have, sharing stories. Anytime, don't lose those memories. Keep them in your heart. Cherish them. I'm going to miss you, Dad. I love you. Thank you.
Okay, so in typical fashion, as many of you may know, my brother and I are very different people, so I'm going to be standing behind the podium because I had to write all of my notes out. So, all right, so I am, over the past month, I would say, I've really thought a lot about what I would say here, and I've thought about it, and I'd like to share with you today a few memories of how I remember my father, and I think some of the stories may sound a little bit familiar. There's some familiar themes when you do live in the same household, raised by the same father. There's some similarities. So as well, I am going to start out with a car story as well. So when I was thinking about what I'd share, I thought about telling a story about his sense of humor. And like that time that I wrecked his truck when I was 16 years old, this also occurred in Williston, so I don't know what goes on in Williston here, but it's the same town for these antics. I was, of course, fine, but it really did a number on my father's truck. It essentially totaled the truck. It crunched up the front end. Darcy and Allison will remember this story very well. And I remember calling from this gas station in Williston, and I was dreading it. I was like, it's about 20 minutes for him to come from Charlotte over to pick me up, and so I'm sitting getting myself all worked up, and I'm convinced I'm going to be in trouble. I was just waiting for it because this is occasionally I would get in trouble for not cleaning my room. So if you do a number to the truck, this is a big deal. And so I was dreading the ride back home. When he arrived, though, he was so calm. And I still remember how calm he was. And that lecture that I expected, it never came. And I never got in trouble for this. He essentially said to me that you've just got to pay attention when you're driving. And when I'm out and about and driving, I am carrying very precious cargo. So he had to get a new truck. And he said to me, it just moved up my timeline by about 6 months. I was going to get a new truck anyway. And when it came time for me to drive again, I remembered being nervous, and I didn't want to get back in the truck. I was like, I'm never driving again. You go to extremes. And my father said, nope, you've got to get back on the horse again. And then in true Norm fashion, he proceeded to walk me around this new pickup truck, and we sort of stopped around the driver's side area, and he said, so see how this new front end looks? When you come back up the driveway, it should look exactly the same way as it does now. So he was and he loved that line. And I will say that probably for the next 8 months after I left the driveway, whenever I came back in, he'd always ask me how my time was, but then he would also ask how the front end of the truck was. So a lot of you will probably remember my father for his jokes and his humor and his love for a cold beer. But I have a different perspective. And I think as many of you know, my father and I were very close. I was 5 when my mother passed away. And so for me, my father was the center of my world. I went everywhere with him. And so one of my favorite childhood memories was riding with my dad on Saturday mornings, taking the garbage to the dump. As some of you may remember, Charlotte used to have a town landfill. And so on the way, we'd stop at Marble's store. He would get a pack of smokes, and I would get a pack of Hubba Bubba gum. And we were 2 peas in a pod. And even though he would later give up smoking, because apparently it's not good for your health, over the years, I always found great comfort being in a truck and riding somewhere with my dad. And it didn't matter where we were going, we always had the best conversations. We'd talk about current issues, school, work, and what things were like when he was young. He'd often tell the same stories as my brother said, and I loved hearing about them. It was like catching up with an old friend you hadn't seen for a while. And he told the same stories exactly the same way every time. The time that Peter, the cat, the family cat he had growing up, he won him at the fair, and his mom had a sign by the door which read, Peter in, Peter out, and that was basically the status of where the cat was, inside the house or outside of the house. And he told that story multiple times. Or how Peter got fed first at the dinner table because his father was also a cat person. And occasionally I'd ask a question that would launch into a full-blown history lesson. And nowadays, if you have a question, you just Google it, right? It's pretty simple. But growing up, I had something much better. I had my dad, and he seemed to know all of the answers. So in those truck rides over the years, we always seemed to solve the world's problems and mine. And along the way, we built a lifetime of memories. And so as I look back on those conversations, I realize he was teaching me to be open-minded and to learn how to analyze a situation and make an objective decision. And those are skills I use every day on my job now. And after I went to college, if the time between conversations went too long, I'd return to my dorm room and I'd find a voice message from my father stating, "Jessica, this is your father. I live at 3220 Mount Philo Road. Here is my phone number. Call me." And as an adult, it was the same routine. We'd talk before or after work. And because even though I was out of the house by then, I still needed to start or end my day talking with Dad. It was always the best part of my day. And sometimes he was busy. There was that time I called and he said, "Can I call you back? I've got something going on." I said, "Okay, sure." He called me back and he said, "I was in the middle of buttering my toast, and so I had to finish that." And so he couldn't do two things at once, so he called me back for that. But those stories and that conversation, it's what I will miss the most about my father, hands down. So the thing about my father that some of you may not realize, it wasn't always about those grand gestures. For us, it was really the small things. And it was those little moments in life that you can miss if you're not paying attention to them. The annual ritual of getting the boat ready for summer or winter, it was getting grinders at the old brick store and spending the day cleaning. I did the outside and my father did the outside, or I did the inside, my father did the outside. And it signaled the change of seasons. And we'd come home and we'd feel accomplished and we'd talk about what a great day it was. It was sitting by the wood stove in January, because for those of you who live in Vermont, January can be harsh. And my dad used to say that nothing beats wood heat. And he always used to ask me, he says, "Why do you buy this gym membership? Why don't you come up in the woods with me, chop some wood, you'll get a better workout, and it doesn't cost a thing." I never did take him up quite as much on that offer as he. And then it was Friday night dinners at Bohno's. It was a favorite Italian restaurant we used to go to, and that was our spot. I'd get a pizza, he'd get a child's portion of ravioli, and then he'd help me finish the pizza. And over the years, the restaurants may have changed, but our routine was the same. Sometimes friends would join, sometimes we'd go shopping, as Miles and Nancy know, but oftentimes it was just us on Friday night. And it was spending summers on the boat. My father could be frugal, and getting a big ticket item like a boat back in the 80s seemed out of character for him. But he had a different vision. It was after our mom had passed away, and he told me later that he needed something to do with us kids in the summer. And he'd been to Mike Crane's at Saranac Lake and thought maybe this would be a good way to see friends and keep everyone entertained. So my father, he really always understood the big picture and the value of time. And while he would wear the same jacket or shirt until it had holes in the sleeves, he found resources to invest in our family because he knew we wouldn't get those years back. So this year, we called moments like these the small victories. And each day, we would look for something positive. And we would call that our victory for the day. Because my father was an optimist. And he looked at the glasses half full. He taught me the value of hard work, dependability, and taking the high road. And I think my father realized sooner than most that life is not a dress rehearsal. And we get one shot, and you've got to make it count. So he really was, he was my role model, he was my best friend, and he was my true north. And I'm going to miss him so much. But when I look back on this year, I am so fortunate because I've been given the gift of time. I had time with my father. I had time in Vermont. I had time to really step back and assess what's important in life. And it's health, family, friends, and the legacy that we leave. And that is what he has taught us. And that's it. He knew these were the big rocks in life. And it's evident by all of you here today, and for those of you who are virtual or with us in spirit. So we're so thankful for all of you. You've been such an incredible source of strength to us and to our family over the years, and certainly this year of all years. I know that my father would be so overwhelmed by your kindness. So thank you all. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, thank you. I have received a few tributes from some folks that I would like to read via email, folks who wanted to be here today. So the first one, this is from Emily Mudrick, which is, for those of you who know, this is my dad's sister. So I asked Emily to share a few thoughts on my father as she was growing up with him, because she has got such a different experience. We didn't grow up with my dad the same way, and so it's different. So she has said this: Norman always loved sports, particularly baseball. Grandparents were summer visitors from Florida, and in the evenings, Norman would sit with Grandpa Bohn in a hot third-floor bedroom, no AC in the 40s, listening on the radio to the Giants, playing at the Polo Grounds, or the Dodgers, which is Norman's team, at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. He was called Bumps as a little boy, and one evening, playing kind of rough with his father, he landed wrong. Crack, he broke an arm. And one summer, Grandpa took Norman for a haircut. He must have directed the barber all off, because Norman appeared at home with an almost shaved head, an arm in a sling, legs in shorts, and stood happily for a snapshot. And then to go to kindergarten, he got his first pair of longies, posed for a snapshot with a big, proud smile. And he loved summers in Bayview, Michigan. That's how he developed his love of the University of Michigan football. And at the other grandparents' cottage, the house in the woods, he was always doing something outside by day and sleeping at night on a cold sleeping porch. Learned to swim in the very cold waters of Lake Michigan. And as much as he loved sports and the outdoors, he didn't much love school until he got to Hoosac School in New York State at age 16, and more significantly, to the University of Vermont, and who knew, to a lifetime enthusiast of history. Okay, so in my parents' wedding, Sue Engbrecht was one of the bridesmaids. So they went to college with my mom and my dad, and they live in Italy now. And her family has sent this to us to read today. We have been friends of Norman and Roxy since college, and our children and granddaughter always wanted to see him when we were in Vermont. He has been a very special friend all 3 years, and even came over to see us in Italy. We will never forget all the love he shared, and he will be missed by us all. You are still one of the bright stars in our sky, Norman. Love, Sue Weatherby, and Brecht, Ron, and all. And then this is from an excerpt from an email I received from Ken Lewis, who was his roommate at UVM, his best man, and he is in Florida right now, unable to join. So he said, Norm and I got acquainted at Sigma Nu in 1962, and we decided to room together the following year. We hit it off well, finding we shared common interests and values and enjoying each other's company. And while we had lots of fun at the house, we tended towards quieter times for conversation and reflection. So he graduated in June 1963 and got a job at Grumman Aerospace on Long Island, and then went to serve in the Navy. And after Dad finished at Vermont, he pursued his master's in teaching, he got married, and Ken was his best man. And years later, my father was Ken's best man. So he remembered visiting them in Charlotte when they first moved into their new home. And then in the ensuing years, Norm and I stayed in touch regularly, either by phone or in person. We were soulmates, finding comfort and trust in each other's views and opinions. And so he sent a very long email just reaching out after my father passed away. So I wanted to share a few words from that tribute. Okay. So those are the ones that I have via email. And if anyone else has any memories or stories they'd like to share, feel free. Okay, Jen. This is my cousin Jen, so Emily's youngest.
Okay, here we go. Hi. I honestly don't know how I'm going to be able to follow those, Chris and Jess, but I'll give it a shot. At least I know standing up here crying, I'll be in good company. So Norm was my uncle. As Jessica said, my mom is Norm's sister. So Norman and I were very close. It's almost hard for me to really convey to you guys what made us so close, but I'm going to give it a shot. For starters, we shared a name. He loved his name. I didn't love being Norman so much, so I quickly changed it. But that was my middle name until I got married. But ultimately, it wasn't really the name that connected us. My grandparents, you saw a lot of them in the pictures, they were pretty formal people. We came from a pretty formal family. And Norman and I both appreciated the traditions of our family, but we both like to kind of push the envelopes of that seriousness and the formality of our family. Specifically, we really shared the love of an off-color joke. So I would often look over at Norm when he was visiting. He was typically sitting next to my husband, Matt, and they were sort of talking, whispering under their breath. If Christopher was there, he was usually part of that too. They would all be cracking up. We had no idea what exactly was being said, but we all knew exactly what was being said. We shared a love of football. God forbid we shared a love of watching football on Thanksgiving. That was definitely another thing that wasn't part of my growing up. I don't think it was part of his either. Sometimes he and I would even go to the Montclair High football games when he would come down, probably just his way of avoiding having to help with the cooking, but it was a nice tradition, and I remember it fondly. In recent years, he'd come and he'd plop himself down on the couch. He'd pepper my husband, Matt, with questions where every professional football player went to college, where'd they get their professional start. I think, as the years went on, Matt just started making stuff up because he had no idea the answers, but Norm seemed happy with that. It's a nice little tradition. We talk on the phone a lot, and the conversation would always start the same way. The phone would ring, and I'd hear, "Jennifer, coffee." He never missed the opportunity to make fun of a New Jersey accent. That was another thing that we had in common. Both of us were proud to grow up in New Jersey, but never too proud to make fun of it. When we'd drive up to Vermont in the summers, Norman was proud to show off his gardens, take us into the woods behind his house. We even slept in a tent. Christopher reminded me. I had no remembrance of that at all. Coming from the suburbs in New Jersey, Vermont was practically the wilderness for us, and especially Mount Philo Road wasn't paved back then, so we felt like we were going off-roading. I remember leaving every year. I would just stare out the back window, sobbing and crying because it was such a warm and welcoming place to visit. In recent years, Norm would make the trip down to our house, my parents' house in Montclair, multiple times a year. And having just done that drive, I'm not sure we gave him enough credit for how long and how often he did that. He was always with us for Thanksgiving. I think Jessica probably could have done an entire montage of us sitting at the table during Thanksgiving. My daughter, Sarah, she started a tradition of writing down in a book of what we were thankful for. So I went back and I looked to see what Norman was thankful for. He was always very appreciative of our hospitality, but as a man of few words, he said, "I am thankful for family, food, and football." So that pretty much summed it up. He loved his family. He loved my kids. They loved him. We called him Grunkle Norman, Great Uncle Norman. He was predictable, and we loved that. Jessica and Chris both said it was the same jokes. It was the same thing. Every time he saw my kids, he'd say, "Thomas, Sarah, what do they feed you for lunch every day?" He was somehow fascinated with school lunches. He came bearing Whitman's samplers, and we laughed about Joe Schlabotnik, who we had no idea who that was. Turns out he was a baseball player in the Peanuts cartoon, but for some reason that was funny to Norman, so Joe Schlabotnik was funny to us too. We just really loved laughing with Norman, same jokes all over and over. Maybe we'd throw a new raunchy one in every now and then. So I could go on and on and on. As I said at the beginning, it's kind of hard to adequately express how I feel about my Uncle Norm. We just were kindred spirits. There'll be a big hole at our Thanksgiving table and in our lives, but I'll make sure, keep up to this tradition of telling some off-color jokes, making sure Joe Shabotnik shows up, and Grunkle Norman will stay in our hearts forever. And as Norm used to like to say, okay, hon, have a good one. Thanks.
Okay. So Miles, would you like to? So this is Miles Heller. He was a fraternity brother of my father's and then also a colleague at South Burlington High School. And you guys have been friends for 60 years?
61 years.
61.
Norman and I met in 1960. And I can honestly say we were friends for 61 years without an argument. A lot of that had to do with the fact that our political interests were on the same side of the spectrum. He raised 2 children basically alone, and the people that they've become are obvious. And they're here today. We taught together for 29 years. I talked to him about a course that he was creating called Consumer Economics. And we actually, it's no longer taught because Norman's not around, but it dealt with things that we should know, but none of us do. Credit cards, insurance, everything that had to do with economics, but it was practical, and it was something that every kid should have, and the kids appreciated it. Kids came back for years and said, because you told me about such and such, I was able to deal with it. And every kid should have that today, but it's a crime they don't. What kind of a friend was Norman? When Roxy passed away, Nancy and I were about to get married that very week, and a friend of ours had a dinner party for us, and I did not expect Norman to come, but he came. And I'll remember it forever. Midway through my career, teaching career, I was very unhappy with my job as department chairman. I thought it was a useless position, and I liked teaching full-time with the kids. And Jessica recently found a letter from her dad to me, which changed my whole attitude, told me how important the job was and what I had done. His encouragement turned my whole year around. That's the kind of person he was. A few weeks ago, I went down to Norman's, and he gave me a note. And I saw him frequently while he was ill. And the note said this: I had thought our friendship would last many more years. Under the current circumstances, that friendship, under the current circumstances, that might not look like a possibility. Therefore, I want to give you the print of the UVM campus circa 1906. It was given to me by my father while I was a student at UVM. By giving you this print, it is my hope that in some way we continue our friendship. I'm sorry for being so emotional, but that's a tough one. Loyalty was important to Norman. When Roxy got sick, the superintendent of schools knew Norman well. And there was an obscure clause in the teacher's contract that allowed the superintendent, in special conditions, to release a teacher to take care of a family issue and not dock their pay. Norman was not in school for the entire year. And He never said a word, but he never missed a day of school. He never missed a meeting. He paid back because he believed in loyalty. And boy, that's an important value. We used to talk nightly. He'd call me or I'd call him about some ridiculous political thing, and that he knew would outrage me, and I knew would outrage him. And now, when it happens, I still think about it. I say, God, I'd like to talk to Norman. He was a great friend, and I'll miss him every day. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. So we've got Sue Barber and Jonathan, her son. So Sue was in my parents' wedding as a bridesmaid, and she is here. She's in the back there, and this is her son, Jonathan.
I didn't make the slideshow. My sister made the slideshow, but I didn't make the slideshow. But anyway, first dirty joke, Norman. First time I've ever seen a grown man swim naked, Norman. First sip of beer was from my dad, but I'm pretty sure Norman was sitting right next to him. Of all my parents' friends, he's one person I can actually say was my friend. When I lived in Montreal, I had a party I had a few people over, not really a party, from Montreal, some close friends, and I actually invited Norman to come down because I wanted him to be there because he, when I think of camp, I think of, fires on the beach, floating around on an inner tube, drinking cheap beer, dinners on the deck, and I think of Norman. 3 o'clock would come around, and his truck would pull in, and it just wasn't the same if he wasn't there. So it was really a part of being there, and certainly I knew him my whole life. So I'll miss him. Cheers, Norman.
Just have to add a few words because Norman was really like a brother to me. We were best buddies. I met him sophomore year at UVM when he started dating Roxy, whom he married. And Roxy and I and Sue Weatherby, who would be here if she weren't in Germany or Italy, we were roommates together. Norman used to come down and visit when we were all in the apartment together in Hyattsville, Maryland, and he always had a story about his bus ride down, and always something exciting happened in the men's room that he had to relay to us. Somebody tried to pick him up or something, but he never held back on what he had to say, and he was always a great support. And through the years, actually, before I even knew Norman, we found out later on we were born in the same hospital as was this gentleman back here. And it's Montclair Glenridge, but the birth certificate said East Orange, so I don't know. Norman did tell me once what end the maternity ward was in, but I can't remember. So our friendship grew, and of course, Roxy died. They were down to visit us in Washington, D.C. when we were down there. We were in the Army. Dwayne was in the Army, so we were always moving around, but we always kept in touch. And they came down right before we went over to Germany for our first tour. And Roxy died shortly after that when we were there and couldn't come back. After she was gone, then we spent a lot of time together. He was always at our cottage on Potash Bay. We spent hours and hours, as Jonathan said. He was always the life of the party, and we traveled together. Dwayne and he went on battlefield tours twice to Europe. We all went to Italy to see Sue and Ron and stayed with them for a couple of days, and then the men went on to another battlefield tour, and I went on to visit a friend in Germany. So I did see Norman a day and a half before he died. I came early this summer so I could have some time with him because I had a feeling it wasn't going to last long, but we sure hoped it would have lasted longer than it did. He was a good friend. He's been a good friend to all of us. We miss Roxy to this day. And seeing those pictures brings back so many happy memories of us all together. So we will miss him for sure. He's much loved by our whole family. To see, Jonathan came from Rhode Island, flew up yesterday to be here, and Wendy probably is at a game for one of her kids. But when I told them that Norman was dying, our daughter's Wendy, who you saw in one of the pictures, said, "That can't be. He's like a staple in our family. He's one of the family. How are we going to survive without him?" Well, we'll go on, but it's sure not going to be easy not having him with us.
Okay. All right. Okay, we've got, this is Tim Volk, our next door neighbor for many years.
Good afternoon. So I mowed my lawn this morning, and it's about a 2-hour chore, and I was reflecting on Norm, and it was kind of a memorial mow. He was, as you've heard, he was into his house, and he was keen on tending to his perennials, felling trees, chopping wood, and mowing his lawn. But here's the thing. I'm like the substitute lawnmower. I don't do it. I did it because that sling right there. So since my wife stopped working about 20 years ago, she took on the lawn. And we always had good banter about Norm, and we always knew when it was time to mow the lawn because he'd be out there. And we thought, uh-oh, time for Mary to get out there. Time for the lawn girl to get out there. And invariably, she'd be out there in her sports bra and her yoga tights or whatever minimal wear for lawn mowing in the summer. And Norm would be out there. And he'd be out there just engaging, talking to us. And it was, it was a great way to get to know him a little bit. And invariably, that would lead to a beer over at our house. And he always brought his own, except for the first time when he discovered that we like IPAs. And Norman was not an IPA man. He was a light beer. I discovered just last summer that he actually liked Stella Artois, which is a European, pretty light Pilsner beer. In any case, we have been there for 37 years. We didn't know him like everyone else knew him, but we knew him in a fun, neighborly, cut the lawn kind of way. So here's to Norm.
Thank you, Tim. And I will just say, Tim and Mary, my father has said many times this over the years, and especially this year, how thankful he was that you and your family moved in next door, because it's just been wonderful neighbors. So I want you to know that he and I had talked about that many years. So, okay. Well, I appreciate you. Is there anyone else? But I think this has been a lot. I know this is, okay. So Dwayne, this is Dwayne Barber.
I'll make it a Barber trifecta. I'm Dwayne Barber. I went to school here with Norman. We were not in the same fraternity. I knew he was a cakewalker, and I really got to know him in 1971 when he and Roxy were moving to their house on Mount Philo Road. And Susan and I were moving into a suburban square off White Street. And with young families, we did a lot of things together, whether it was a hike up to Silver Lake, down near Lake Dunmore, or with the Cranes, with the Davidsons, we go skiing over there at Glen Ellen. Norman and my wife always would tell big tales about certain areas of notoriety, one called the Mixing Bowl. You can take it from what it was, but Norman we talked about that for 50 years, about it. The one thing Norman and I did pretty much exclusively, he was a real historian. And being in the military, you go to various courses and you learn about battles and what went wrong. So we did a lot of battlefield tours together, not just to walk around. We get the Military Academy Battlefield Atlas. We take it, we get maps, and we do these battlefields. We did from Hubbardston all the way to the Piave, just north of Venice. We probably did, I want to say, 50 or more of these tours. And it just wasn't the tour itself, as meeting people. Norman had traveled to Europe many times with his parents before, so he kind of knew his way around, especially in France, where most of these battlefields were. We had the camp, and when we were here, the summers we were able to get here, we always linked up with Norman. He, as someone said, he always had a good joke, good laugh, and especially as we retired in the 90s, we did do a lot of traveling together. Whenever we live outside of Boston, whenever UVM was playing either basketball or hockey, we'd try to take in a game with one of the colleges that they play down there. We did that just about every year. So I got to know him in a real special way. He was probably my best friend. He may be gone, but he won't be forgotten in the Barber family. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I know this has been a very emotional afternoon. We've had certainly some laughs and some tears, and I think when we certainly look back on a celebration of life, my father had quite a life. He was 80, and we're just so thankful for all of you in this room, and those of you who are watching online. And we've had a lot of folks who have reached out to us as well. So thank you so much. If anyone is interested, just please continue to, eat, and, the bar is still open, so please partake. You're getting into happy hour time now, so it's quite acceptable. And then for those of you who are interested, after this, we will be going over to the Fleming Museum. We've got a memorial bench and tree for our parents, so that's open to anyone. We've got some directions out on the guest book table for those who are interested. But thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.